This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
Well, what an honor it is to have Peter Schiff on our show this morning, one of the most popular guests ever, and for a good reason. Peter is a great TV star among all his other accomplishments. In teaching people about Austrian economics, about the Austrian business cycle theory, no one has been more eloquent and more effective than Peter Schiff. He also is the head and founder of Euro-Pacific Capital, a very successful firm in Connecticut. He is a great spokesman, continues to be a great spokesman for Austrian economics and sound money in a different venue. He's running for the Republican nomination to replace the guy I always think of as Crook Dodd. But Peter, before we get into those questions, let's talk about your new book. This is coming up, and people can pre-order it on Amazon right now. It's due out in about 2 weeks. How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes.
Yeah, I mean, the book basically, my father wrote a book called How an Economy Grows and Why It Doesn't, which actually was taken from his book, The Biggest Con, How the Government is Fleecing You. And, over time, a lot of people, really liked that book. I mean, it kind of got a little bit of a cultish status because it explained economics in a very simple way using, three people on an island, fishing by hand. And it showed how their economy grew based on underinvestment and savings, and it talks about capital investment and productivity. And then my father, of course, had the island society get more complex, and ultimately the government ruined it. And so I decided to expand that and really incorporate more of the modern experience, bringing it up, not just through Roosevelt Johnson, which is kind of where my dad left off, but bring in all the experiences of recent years with the housing bubble, with Obama, with Bush, with Greenspan, with Bernanke, with stimulus, and all these things, and just try to present an explanation of economics and our current problems in a way that average people with no real background in economics could read it and understand it. And I think this book does that. I think it's, there's humor there. It's illustrated. It's not, you can read the whole book in under 2 hours, I think. It's, about 250 pages. And I hopefully it will do a lot to raise the level of understanding in our country. Hopefully we can sell a lot of books in Connecticut, where I'm running for Senate. Maybe it'll help my Senate campaign if we get enough of those books out there.
Well, Peter, I'm one of those who've always loved your dad's book. I've had a copy for many years. I've loaned it to many people. It's just an extraordinary way to learn economics. Your dad is a great hero and also a great orator. I guess that must be genetic in part because you're a great orator too. But this book is so extraordinary. I just can't tell you how thrilling it is to have it back in print and also updated. It's going to do a lot of good.
They were selling them on that one is the Kingdom of Malta. They'd sell them for $100, $200 on Amazon.
That's right.
So this will be good. And I don't know. I've got a bunch of copies too of the Kingdom of Malta. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. I have a few thousand copies in my garage. So either I'll redo that one or maybe I'll sell the ones that I have because I know there's a lot of demand for that little book too.
Boy, that's right. And Peter, you're a great expert in the economy. You've been teaching about what's wrong with what the Federal Reserve does, what just the unbelievable deficits, questions of debt otherwise in society. What do you see ahead for this economy? Is it really, as the mainstream media keep telling us, really we're on a rebound, we're getting better and better every day, or is there something else going on?
There's not a chance that that's going to happen. The government is simply inflating another bubble, only this time it's not a stock market bubble or a real estate bubble. It's a government bubble. And this one is going to do even more damage because at least in the dot-com bubble, we did manage to create some companies that had some value. I mean, there was a lot of junk there, but there were a lot of good companies. Maybe their stock prices got too high, but we have some companies. We did benefit from somewhat what some of the things that happened in the dot-com area, and certainly in the real estate bubble. We may have built too many houses, but at least we got them. I mean, people have places to live. It's better than just an empty lot. So we have real value there. But the government bubble is buying us nothing but socialism. Big programs we can't afford and don't need, more regulation. It's going to hurt the economy even more. And, of course, when this gigantic bubble bursts, which, of course, will manifest itself with a collapse in the bond market and skyrocketing interest rates and runaway inflation, it's going to be much worse for the country. And, of course, there's no bailout and no stimulus that will work when the bailer is itself looking for a bailout.
Well, they've got to sell this year, what, $2 trillion worth of federal bonds?
Well, that's just like the new bonds. What about all the bonds that mature? You know, the national debt is about 12.5 or 13 trillion, and a good part of that debt comes due every year. You know, they're not 30-year bonds. Most of that debt is 1 or 2 year maturities, 3 year maturities. So every year, a substantial piece of debt matures. So we probably have to sell $2 billion in new debt, and maybe we have to finance 2 or 3 or 2 trillion, and then we probably have to finance 2 or 3 trillion in maturing debt. I mean, so the amount of money that we have to borrow on an annual basis is staggering. And what's more important, for years, Social Security was collecting more in taxes than it paid out in benefit. So the government was able to take some of that extra Social Security money and spend it. But now Social Security is running a deficit. So now not only does the Treasury have to sell bonds to finance the budget, but the Social Security trust funds have to sell their bonds to make Social Security payments.
So we're in a pickle. So what do you see ahead for like the average American? I mean, what's going to happen? What should the average guy in Connecticut, for example, do to try to protect himself in this environment?
Well, he should register Republican and vote for me in the primary. But he should also try to plan for the fact that I might not win, in which case this situation isn't going to turn around. I think that it's going to be very difficult. I think the standard of living for most Americans is going to be diminishing over time. The employment opportunities are going to be diminishing. The quality of life in this country is going to be eroding. It is not a pretty picture unless we can seriously change the culture in Washington, because we are, almost, we're way down on that road to serfdom. I mean, there might be one more fork left that we could take, but it is very dangerous what's happening. And for a lot of people, unfortunately, the answer might be emigration. A lot of younger people who want to work hard and who are ambitious and want to make something of their lives. Unfortunately, it's more difficult here now than it is in other countries, and it's only going to get more difficult in the years ahead if we continue with this agenda.
Peter, I know myself some smart, successful young people who have immigrated, but of course the government, I guess the U.S. government may be the only one in the world that attempts to tax you after you leave the country, even if you give up your citizenship and are earning no money in this country.
Yeah, the U.S. government, is trying to punish people who want to leave, and that shows you that how bad our policies are, and that there are people who are willing to leave and still pay the punishment. They're willing to pay the tax just to get that albatross around their neck. I mean, at one point, a U.S. citizenship was something that was highly coveted. Now people have to pay to get rid of it.
Peter, one of the great areas that you've talked about and have been such a bringer of light to a very dark situation is what's happened to college students. The average college student today comes out with a vast load of debt, or his parents are partially impoverished by paying for the whole thing. But this is not just something that descended from the moon. It's a result of federal policies, as you've pointed out.
Of course. I mean, the politicians, in order to get the votes of the young people, and of course, this is all part of probably lowering the voting age down to 18. If we would have raised the voting age maybe to 25 or 30, none of this would have happened, and kids would be in a lot better shape today. But of course, to get the votes of the college students, what the politicians promise is loans to make college more affordable. And of course, that sounds great to a 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid who really doesn't understand anything. If someone's going to give them money, that's a good thing. But what they don't understand is the reason that college is so expensive is because of all those loans. If the loans didn't exist, then the students wouldn't be able to pay these inflated prices. Now, they might have to get a job and work their way through college like my dad did. He went to college here in Connecticut. He didn't get any money from his parents, and he didn't borrow a nickel. He took a summer job waiting tables, and a lot of his friends worked their way through college. It wasn't hard to do because college wasn't expensive. Well, today, most kids don't work their way through college. They just borrow their way through college, and then they work the next 20 years trying to pay off the loans. It's much better to work a little bit while you're in school and graduate debt-free. And so if we got the government out of the subsidy business, then colleges would be forced to reduce prices to levels that students could actually afford. And, that would require lots of cuts, just like airlines. When the airlines can't fill their seats, they have a sale. There's never a sale at universities. They never have 50% off sales on tuition. How come? If the loans stop, then no kids would apply. And when the applications dried up, the colleges would do the only thing that they can do, slash prices. And then, of course, they'd have to start asking their professors, hey, we got to cut your salary. We can't pay you this much. You're going to have to grade your own papers. You can't have all these, assistants doing it. And maybe we don't need this big fancy gymnasium. Maybe we should sell it. I mean, all this stuff is going to happen if the free market is unleashed. But right now, no university has to economize because the kids will pay whatever they charge because the government's going to make sure they have the money. And now Obama is going to make it even worse. Obama is ending guaranteed student loans, and instead the government is going to loan the money directly to the kids. And the first thing that Obama said that he's going to do is he's going to make it so that the kids don't have to pay back as much money as they have to pay back now. So now the kids will be willing to borrow even more money because the government says they're going to forgive a bigger portion of the loan, which means the universities now have carte blanche to increase tuitions at an even faster rate.
Peter, why is the government, in all areas of life, it seems, along with the mainstream media, except for some truth tellers like you, promoting the idea that everybody ought to spend, go into debt to the extent they can, and that's the path to prosperity?
Well, because they're trying to keep this phony economy going. They're trying to, blow more air into a deflating bubble. Remember, our whole phony economy is based on spending borrowed money. And so the minute the spending stops, then the whole thing falls apart, which, of course, has to happen eventually because you can't have an economy based on spending. I mean, because we're spending other people's money, and we can only spend as long as they're willing to lend. But they don't want to, go through the difficult times. It's like, you're an alcoholic, and you don't want to go through, you withdrawal or you're a drug addict, and so you just keep shooting up because you don't want to deal with the reality of having to go cold turkey. So that's all the politicians care about is keep it going, go deeper into debt, buy more stuff we can't afford because we can pretend the economy is growing because all they point to for the economy is the GDP. They look at retail sales. They look at consumer spending. And as long as that number is going up, everybody is happy. Meanwhile, the debt is going up even faster, and that doesn't concern anybody.
Peter, tell us about what's happening in Connecticut. You're running for the Republican nomination. You're running against an old-time congressman and the wife of a wrestling entrepreneur. But seems to me you're the only one, as usual, who's telling the truth about the economy, is telling the truth about what we face and the sorts of issues that people ought to be concerned about. So tell us what's happening.
Yeah, well, I'm probably also the only candidate who understands the truth. So that's why I'm speaking it. But also, most people who are running for political office are doing so because they want to be in politics. It's something that they see themselves doing. They're trying to make a career out of it. And so they have to be very political in the way they speak and what they say. They can't risk offending anybody. One of my opponents is always talking about cutting taxes, all kinds of taxes she wants to cut, and balancing the budget. But on cutting spending, not a word, because she's afraid to step on somebody's toe. If you ask her, well, what about cutting spending? Well, let's have a bipartisan committee to look into that. She's not even in office yet, and she's asking for bipartisan committees. I'm the only person who is actually speaking about the reality of the problems, that government is run out of control, that it's not about taxes, it's about spending, that the spending has to stop, and it has to stop right now, and that means cutting programs, eliminating some, cutting back on others, slashing what the federal government is spending, because it is spending like crazy. The government is now spending twice as much as it spent 10 years ago. That is unprecedented. This growth of government is similar only in proportion to the New Deal. But the problem is, when the New Deal started, the government was tiny. And even after the New Deal ended, it was still small. That this time, we took a gigantic government and made it enormous. And the economy can't survive. Free enterprise capitalism cannot survive beneath the weight of all this government. So I'm out there trying to win this race for Connecticut, trying to win the race for the country, to go to Washington and do what these career politicians will not do. I want to go there and I want to put my foot down. I want to stop the national debt ceiling from being raised. I want to filibuster that, and I want to make sure every Republican or Democrat stands with me and stops just talking about balancing the budget in the future and does it right now. And not just balancing it, we need to bring it into surplus. We need to make up for all these years of deficit.
Peter Schiff, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks for all you do. And I want to urge everybody to go ahead and order Peter's book, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, which is an update of his dad's great book, which one of my favorite books ever about teaching real economics to people. So thank goodness this book is going to be back in print, improved and updated. Peter, thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to The Lew Rockwell Show. Produced by LewRockwell.com, the best-read libertarian website in the world.
It grows and why it crashes.
Yeah, I mean, the book basically, my father wrote a book called How an Economy Grows and Why It Doesn't, which actually was taken from his book, The Biggest Con, How the Government is Fleecing You. And, over time, a lot of people, really liked that book. I mean, it kind of got a little bit of a cultish status because it explained economics in a very simple way using, three people on an island, fishing by hand. And it showed how their economy grew based on underinvestment and savings, and it talks about.
This is The Lew Rockwell Show.
Well, what an honor it is to have Peter Schiff on our show this morning, one of the most popular guests ever, and for good reason. Peter is a great TV star among all his other accomplishments. In teaching people about Austrian economics, about the Austrian business cycle theory, no one has been more eloquent and more effective than Peter Schiff. He also is the head and founder of Euro-Pacific Capital, a very successful firm in Connecticut. He is a great spokesman, continues to be a great spokesman for Austrian economics and sound money in a different venue. He's running for the Republican nomination to replace the guy I always think of as Crook Dodd. But Peter, before we get into those questions, let's talk about your new book. This is coming up, and people can pre-order it on Amazon right now. It's due out in about 2 weeks. How an Economy